Welcome to Cancer and Peace. My name is Sean Stewart, and I'm facilitating a conversation with my good buddy, Peter Scalzo, on his 18-year cancer journey. And we're going to just take a conversation we had last time and just to go a little further and complete out some thoughts that we were going on. Because if you've listened to this podcast very much, you'll hear that we talk a lot about recovery concepts. And so we thought it'd be good just to explain the why and what's going on. And so last time you laid out a little bit of the fact that you had found a lot of peace from what I think of as the inner journey in recovery. And so I'll let you add any more intro you want to, and then we'll kind of dive into some of the topics we wanted to talk about with that.
Yeah, because I think, Sean, and thanks for the intro, I think that so many people, especially Christians, just view a recovery program, which is basically a 12-step program. And in my case, Celebrate Recovery, Jesus Christ is the higher power. They view it for addicts only. And for me, it's the best kept secret that within those 12 steps, which really mirrored the Beatitudes that Jesus gave in Matthew chapter 5 when he launched his ministry about his kingdom, it really outlines for me an entire pathway. I don't like to say formula because I'm not a real formula kind of guy, but definitely a pathway, a model. And it was something that I was always intrigued by. I mean, I've been in the church for 42 years and I was intrigued by the 12 steppers. I was like, wow, but I couldn't relate because I thought, okay, that's for addicts only. But the part that intrigued me was the powerless and the surrender part. And what I saw in a 12-stepper that seemed to be humility, yet joy at the same time. A person who had basically recognized that they're really not in control of a lot of things, and yet they seem to be joyful. I thought that was an interesting combination.
Yeah.
Right. And so when I was in my own place of hurts, and I was elder in the church, representing the church legally, held out there as this guy who had his act together, 6 kids, trophy, this and that. And yet I was in this deep place of hurt and failure was all around me. And it was this model, this program where I really, I think for the first time did what we call the inner journey and really found, I believe, peace. And I was in my cancer journey at the time, but it was 1 year before I had that sea change surgery where my cancer became metastatic in 2015, which was a sea change for me. It changed everything. Mm-hmm. So I had the tools of recovery. I had the tools of peace with God, peace with myself, and the ability through my recovery journey to access my emotions, my feelings, all that stuff. So,
yeah, I think the thing that I tied last time to what I think that represented for you was something we called the wall.
Yeah.
And so the why, and one of the reasons why we got to why it was important is that a cancer journey represents a wall moment or a mm-hmm. moment where you're in crisis. And as crisis comes, it's an ask to go into a deeper place in your life. Mm-hmm. That when we get crisis in our life, we're kind of being invited onto a deeper journey of meaning. And that's why I think it attaches to cancer and peace, because we're really wanting to understand and only be in the most important parts of our lives when we're in crisis mode, especially life-threatening crisis modes. And so that's kind of why I think we tie this so closely to the cancer journey, is it just relates to a crisis journey. And so people that come to recovery generally are in crisis. And you described that pretty well. I think we wanted to delve a little further into the whys. And last time I mentioned, I think this concept, and it came from a book called The Cure. And it was basically this idea that only that which is of our true self that's revealed is what can be loved. And so if we're putting on a surface, a mask, so to speak, or if we're putting on something different than who we are, that is what receives love in our life. And so to really find joy and peace, we had to actually be vulnerable enough to show our real selves. And so we wanted to, and we kind of started talking about it a little bit. We want to really talk about something that is why we call it the inner journey. And it's to be able to be loved, you have to know yourself well enough and be vulnerable about your real self to the people that are around you, that are closest to you, your friends, family, the people that you're interacting on in everyday life. And so that's kind of what we think of. And we're not trying to make this too recovery centric, but we would think of that in recovery, though, as a step for moral inventory. And do you want to just describe a bit of what that looked like for you and why it's such an important part a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the word moral, because the step is to do a fearless and moral inventory. The word moral just means honest. That's a big word for me because I had not been honest with myself, God, and others. And there were some things in my life, I'll call them character defects, sins. There were some things in my life that I was not even aware of, really. And so for the first time, I entered into a space with another person to do this inventory. And it was a process of what we call spiritual mapping, but of looking back in order to go forward. In other words, I love emotionally healthy spirituality says, Jesus may live in your heart, but grandpa lives in your bones. So to go back and to look at my parents, the way I was raised, formative years, my siblings, and people who have had an impact on my life, and that I maybe had hurts with, and to see what happened, what emotions did that bring about, what were some of the results of that, what kind of damage. But then the other part was, what was my part? And I think that that's the issue for me. I was big on excuses and rationalizations. So this was the first time in these exercises that I said, okay, I need to own this part. And that was knowing myself, was accepting that I was capable of a lot of stuff. And I mean, codependency bubbled up, which for me was people pleasing, caring more about what people thought about me, attention seeking, recognition seeking, perfectionism, being performance based. And then when I didn't get those things from people, what else boiled up was resentment and anger, unhealthy anger, bitterness. All kinds of things were boiling up. And I was like, wow, I kind of knew some of these things. And so that's the issue is, can I step out of denial, or that mask? Can I step around the mask and face myself honestly?
Yeah.
That was huge for me. It was the first time I had done it. At 42 years of the church, I was 52 years old. First time I admitted and actually confessed these things to another person and to God and myself. I had never done a full inventory list, and out of it came like 21 what we call character defects, but 21 issues.
Yeah, I want to just highlight something you said, because when we say the inner journey, I think there might be a temptation to go, well, hey, I'll go take some notes on myself. But there's an important aspect of what you shared there that I want to just maybe highlight, and that is, when we do a fearless moral inventory, it is taking and journaling down significant relationships in our life, the impact of those relationships, what positives or damage that's come out of that, and then how we've responded in our lives to this. But I like to think of this also as the getting to reality piece there, but to get to reality, you can't do that inside of your head. You have to share this with another person. Mm-hmm. And I think it's better if it's shared even inside of a group. Now, you started out with a counselor who had a lot of wisdom, and so I think that's good. But sharing that journey and those stories will help you if you share that with somebody else who has the ability to ask good questions and to help you see whether or not you're living in reality. Because once you identify certain things that are happening in your lives and you're willing to admit to those. And I thought about it for a long time for myself, and I see this as a pattern all along. It's like we normalize our formative years. I think where we grew up, we normalize that, no matter, even if it's abusive or if it's has all kinds of negative things that happen in your family growing up. We normalize that as this is the way life is. And to me, some of the most shocking stories are people who have normalized sexual abuse and things like this.
Mm-hmm.
But they do. And it's a real thing that happens. And so to get to reality, you have to share it, because then you can have somebody speaking to, you can actually, using more than yourself, find out what is reality, what is normal, what's acceptable, what is real, and what's not in my life. And so there's a temptation to say, hey, I'm just going to write down this inventory and hold it to myself. And yes, I'll maybe even tell God, hey, you can look at the list. But unless you're willing to share that and get feedback on it, you're not going to move into this step of reality.
Yeah, it's great. And the definition for denial that I learned in recovery is a belief system not based in reality.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting. We say this phrase, it's a scriptural phrase, but the truth shall set you free. And I can honestly say that when I looked at the truth of who I was, now it wasn't just the character defects, but also to balance my inventory, it was the positive things too. But to look at myself in a holistic way, the truth shall set me free. I mean, I really got a lot of healing and freedom. And these steps, the 4, 5, and 6, we like to say peace with ourselves.
Yeah.
The first 3 steps, peace with God. These steps, peace with ourselves.
Yes.
Accepting that, okay, I have these issues. I struggle with these things. And at recovery, I go every week. I have several meetings in recovery where I say, okay, these are my struggles. Right.
Yes.
And I accept the reality of who I am. It doesn't mean I don't work on my struggles. I do. But I accept that I do have struggles, and I am who I am. So,
well, and that's just a later part of the journey. So first, once you get to you're willing to see reality. It would be if you're a cancer patient and you're just going, hey, I'm not going to either accept my diagnosis, or maybe you're not even going to go get a diagnosis because you don't want to know reality. It doesn't make things go away. It doesn't get better. In fact, usually it gets worse.
Yeah,
a lot worse by ignoring reality. And so what we're talking about here is there's a parallel between the physical world that you would live in a medical cancer journey, and in your spiritual state of who you are. That, hey, getting to reality is a great place to be. And you actually have to do an inventory and share that out. You have to do something that looks at your life, and somebody has to look at that with you to get a really good diagnosis of what's reality, what's really going on here.
right.
And it should be people you trust that you would work alongside. And there's no perfection, in the same way there's no perfection in a cancer diagnosis and treatment plan. You're going to have to utilize the best you can with the people that you have around you who have skills in this area. And I like this because it's such a great place to live from, moving to peace, because once you can accept that this is who you are, there's hope for treatment. There's hope for moving forward in some big way. And I think that's kind of what we wanted to talk about a little bit further today. And so both you and I have had done fairly extensive moral inventories. I don't know if we were fearless or not, but I think there's a lot of, it takes courage to be vulnerable about your sin issues and the things that are your insecurities. And so I think that takes courage. And so I think that is what we mean by fearless.
Yeah.
When we look at it. And
I think the advantage we had too was the recovery program that we engage in. There are guidelines, and one of them is using I and me statements only, and you're not allowed to fix other people.
Right.
So Jesus says, hey, in his famous speech where he launches his whole ministry and his platform, he says, hey, don't judge others. But then he says, before you talk about the speck in your brother's eye, look at the log in your own eye first. Deal with that, and then you can talk about the speck in your brother's eye. And I think for me, it's about that. It's about looking at the log, the beam in my own eye. And, it's amazing because I used to be a fixer. I used to go into situations and quote scriptures and try to fix people. And it failed. And I think now people tell me stuff I don't even want to know half the time. But the ability to sit back and listen and ask good listening questions, people just benefit so much from that. And it's a loving way to be. But the other thing I digress for just a sec, but the other thing is that the scriptures also say that to confess your sins to one another, that you may be healed.
Mhm.
And I've experienced a lot of healing.
So that's a
with it.
big piece of the coming up step then is
Mhm.
that before we get to that part, I just wanted to say that we have something in when you recognize that your life, areas of your life have not been lived in reality. There's a process that I think each one of us needs to go through to get to renewal. And that is, and I'm going to name it, we'll take it out of even the Christian realm. It's basically whatever the truth is that you actually need to embrace is to begin stating that truth. We suggest doing that in the Christian realm is
Mm.
find biblical truths about who God says you are
Mm.
and what God has said about your situation. And for 90 days solid, take time to say that over and over to
Mm.
God as a prayer. But
Mm.
I think as a general concept, getting that truth deeply in you is what's important. And so if you find yourselves, and I was listening to the Wild at Heart guys, and one of the guys was talking about learning how to fly, and he made a mistake and in landing. Because his muscle memory for flying that particular plane told him to do something. And the moment he was doing a turbo, it put him in reverse and he nearly crashed the plane. And immediately he called himself an idiot. And you're such a loser. Now, on the surface, you were like, well, we say these kind of things all the time. But this is usually a story that comes from a place that's usually formative. And when you're in a crisis mode and those are the words that come out of your mouth,
Mhm.
you literally have to have your mind renewed and a
Mhm.
truth renewed that you're not a loser. You're
Mm.
not an idiot. You're a person that God loves who's been made for a purpose. And the more you can rely on that truth, that reality, and the more real it is to you, and as you walk and live in that, it brings great peace.
Yeah.
But that's like this restoration, renewing the mind, and the mind
Mhm.
must have this kind of repetitive process for at least 90 days before those truths sink in. It becomes part of who we are, and we've exchanged kind of the lie for truth. Because these are just deeply embedded in us. And for some of us, it's longer than that, but a minimum of 90 days of just repeating those truths to defeat the lies that we've kind of grown up with, the
Mhm.
lack of reality. And I think this is something you teach a lot. We do inventory workshops here, and we talk to the guys that come through that this is such an important step is once you get to, hey, I know I have these issues in my life, these character defects.
Mhm.
But what's the truth?
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. Self-talk is huge and it can be negative, very negative. I think when I'm working with guys, and I've been working with guys now for 9 years, you have too, for a long time, there's some common threads. And one of them is rejection-based thinking is a
Yes.
big one. And it is that loser script
Yes.
that goes through guys' minds, like, "Yeah, I can't do anything right," kind of thing. And so to deal in reality and say, hey, I've got this rejection based mentality, I have this script, to then turn over to your higher power and say, yeah, but what do you say about me, higher power? What do you say about me? And then to incorporate that scripture for 90 days is huge. And it's not just like self, I don't know,
Self-help. Yeah.
yeah, self help. It's
No,
not that.
it's
Yeah,
only self-help if you've come to the idea that reality is that you have to help yourself.
right.
What we're really
That's
saying
good.
here
Yeah.
is that no, reality is that there's a power higher than yourself, greater than yourself, and recovery programs all teach this. They don't all you choose the same higher power. If you go to AA, you choose your higher power. Where we're at in Celebrate Recovery, Jesus Christ is our higher power, and so it's not self-help because we're relying on His power to help us be restored to sanity. That's the words we would use.
Right.
But self-help would be, no, I'm not going to have a higher power. I am the higher power.
Mhm.
And then your recovery is only going to be as great as what you can will yourself to be, which is
Mhm.
generally for all of us very little.
The other, like, performance based thinking for guys is huge. I only have as much value as what I produce, perfectionism. You know, those are common threads for guys.
And I have a term I put around all of that,
Yeah.
and it's
What's the term?
insecurity.
Yes.
Insecurity fits both of those categories, and I don't have enough security in who I am, and so that's why it goes back to knowing ourselves. Who are we really, and how valuable are we really? If I don't put on a show, if I don't work hard enough, if I'm not all of those things, am I secure enough in my being as a person
Yeah.
to be valued and loved?
Yeah. And I say to guys, I mean, especially the ones who are fathers, you have this little baby, and this little baby just doesn't do much, eats and poops and cries, and you have to take care of that little baby. Yeah, how valued is that baby? That baby's not performing,
No.
bringing you a value in the sense of helping you pay for something or whatever, but you love that baby just because that baby is.
I think these are really big.
Yeah.
Reason why we embrace it so much for a cancer patient, and I want to keep tying it back because our podcast is about cancer and peace. I really want a cancer patient to understand the reason why we talk about this is I think when you get to a cancer diagnosis and when there's uncertainty in your life, you want to know what makes me secure.
Right.
It's the same concept. And so we're saying, hey, we found in recovery even that's exactly what we're wrestling with ourselves.
Yeah.
Is what makes us secure. And it wasn't about the big sins of drinking, drugs, or whatever that's or devastating things in our lives. It was these underlying things that caused us to cope, to put on some kind of mask. And it could be coping with easing pain through drinking or drugs, but it also could be coping by, hey, I'm going to work to perform.
Right.
Because what I really feel is insecure. I feel like my life doesn't have value unless I've done something. And that's usually coming from a life script that, hey, I learned that as a young child that, hey, in my family, if you didn't work hard, you were considered worthless.
Right.
You were somebody who didn't have value.
Right.
And if you live that script out, then that means you must perform at the highest levels to be valued.
Right. I mean, cancer is one of those diseases outside of our control, and that is the wall.
Yes.
That you've talked about. And as we enter, I mean, we can respond with whatever way we're going to respond to that wall, right? We can bounce off of it. We can try to go through it. But this recovery process where we enter into this place of, hey, I'm powerless over this wall. I need help. And I'm going to turn to, I mean, for me, I'm going to turn to Jesus. And then, okay, I've turned to Jesus, but I can still keep going and get peace, even deeper peace than that with myself, which for me was the inventory process.
Yeah, so we talked about then peace with ourselves, peace with God, but the final step that we want to talk about is peace with others.
Yeah.
And there's still a process to go about there. And it really is, when you've done an inventory, what happens is that in our programs and the things that we've done is you've written down names of somebody and the interactions that have happened and the effect on your life. And that's flowed out into, how you've responded to those people. And to get peace with others is you're going to find when you've done the inventory, there's times when they've hurt you or you've hurt them. Mm-hmm. And when you find that those two things are the case, if you really want to get to deep peace is to forgive them when they've hurt you. Mm-hmm. So going through a forgiveness process, and then where you know that you have caused harm, it's your job to go out and make that right in any way you can. A lot of times it's just asking for an apologize, asking for forgiveness yourself. Sometimes you can do steps of actual restoration. If you've taken something, done something that you can rebuild or restore, you should. Mm-hmm. And that moves you to a place to have peace with others. So peace with yourself, peace with God, and peace with others are the things that we're talking about and why it really fits into cancer and peace.
One of my good friends who was an APRN. She had always prayed for me and was really interested, married to one of my really good buddies. And our kids grew up together. We've been family friends for a long time. She had breast cancer, which turned metastatic. And she knew she was going to pass. She was in her late 50s. And she had me over. I had brought a dinner over, and she said to me, "Is there anything I've done that I need to say that I'm sorry for?" And I just really respected that place that she was going to. You know, she was making peace with others. She wanted, when she left this earth, she didn't want anything. You know, she wanted to experience complete peace within herself. So
Important part of the journey.
yeah.
And I've seen the opposite too. I've seen
Yes.
people who have hung on to bitterness, and what they've given up in that is peace.
Yes.
And so our encouragement is to really look at this and just think about, you know, as we're wrapping up this episode, just we wanted to connect why you hear so much about recovery. And
Yeah.
you've heard both of us have had our own recovery journeys, and we've found this to be so valuable, is to recognize our powerlessness, our need for God, to start walking in reality, look for peace inside of ourselves, getting to reality and being able to release that, getting peace with God and trusting Him with our futures, and then taking all that we've learned in that and trying to build peace with others. What an amazing part of that.
Yeah. And I just, can I dive into this for 1 sec?
You get as much time as you want.
Okay.
This is your podcast.
Well, the peace with others step is a really pivotal and difficult step.
I was like, you make up a new word too?
Yeah, I'm trying not to actually.
Pivotable.
But it's really what I found in my own journey was that I really needed the healing of the other steps in front of it, because I needed to forgive and to experience what my part was and deal with what I had done.
Excellent point.
So yeah, when I went to another person, it was nothing about what they had done to me. It was for me to get that feeling of release and peace of, hey, this is what I've done and I'm sorry. I said it just like that. I'm in a recovery program. I'm making amends. This is one of my steps, and I'm sorry for X, Y, and Z. I've done it in letters. I've done it verbally, but
we do teach that, and specifically,
because it's
not for them; it's for you. You do this
it
for
wasn't
your own peace.
Going to the person saying, "You did this to me," blah blah blah. It wasn't that at all.
Yeah. If you're offering forgiveness to somebody else, much of the time that's something that you do, that you talk about inside of your own. You may talk with those closer, saying, "Hey, I need to forgive this person." They may need to hear it, but rarely is that the case. Most of the time, it's your own heart condition. But if you're needing to ask for forgiveness, that you need to do. And you have to make that, say, hey, you have to admit that you were wrong and ask for forgiveness. But you said something else, and just to wrap that into this, is there's a progression here. And the progression really is moving out of denial. Is I have a cancer journey. I'm at a wall moment in my life. I want to have peace in that journey, and I'm going to take stock of my life. I'm going to do that, and I'm going to trust God with that. With my life. And to do that, I'm actually going to have to write down and take time to go through this and share this with others, have the courage to do that and work through that, releasing to God to get, so I'm at peace with myself the moment I can accept who I am, who I really am. And I become peace with God when I start turning it over to God and just trusting Him with my life. And you get to peace with others when we take responsibility for our own actions and begin forgiving others. That's the most simplified way I think I can summarize it. But you need to do it in order. Because if you start with others and you don't even know yourself, you're likely coming to look for something when you ask for forgiveness. Well, I'm hoping they'll give me a restored relationship. And it can't be, I'm looking for a product on the backside. It is, no, I'm actually looking for peace inside of myself.
And here's the kicker. All of it is meant to be done within community.
Yes, that's I was talking about, you cannot do this in your head. It has to be done in community. That's right. Such an important point that you raised there. Well, we're out of time. I think we've run long enough, but I just wanted,
that was great. Our
whole point was to really connect the why. Why are we talking so much about recovery? We're not trying to make this a recovery podcast, but we do think that, in fact, both of us kind of step back a little bit, as recovery isn't key. It's like an inner journey. There's many ways to do an inner journey, and the principles, though, seem to, I've seen this, we see this in emotionally healthy spirituality. We see this in many other program areas that we've worked in, that these underlying things that we're talking about are deeply embedded in part of how do you get to peace in a journey where there's great struggle. So we'll call that a wrap today. Thanks everybody for listening to us, and we'll look to see you at our next podcast. And if you want more resources, go to cancerandpeace.com. Thanks a bunch.
Bye now.